Hey guys, it's Cynthia and welcome back to my studio. I want to start off today's video with a quick announcement. The Autumn Metamorphosis painting that I recorded for my channel back in November is currently on auction through Everyday Original, and the auction runs through tomorrow, January 22nd, so if you're interested in picking up one of my original oil paintings, I've put a link for you down in the description box. I'm super excited to see the painting go to a good home, and I'm planning on reinvesting the proceeds back into my YouTube channel. So I'm doing another portrait study today, and as always with my time-lapse chat videos, this won't be a painting tutorial, but I will post my palette up on the screen for you. Same as usual for my studies, I'm working on a 5x7-inch tinted gessoed hardboard panel, and for my medium, I'll be using the substance So Slick it once got elected to public office, otherwise known as Liquin. So this wasn't the first study I recorded this week. You could probably see I'm working over top of another one that I terped out, and that was actually the third try that didn't go so well. So I've been focusing on my New Year's goal of simplification, and with my studies I've been attempting to simplify shadow shapes and the planes of the face. So if you've watched my previous videos, you might notice I spend a little more time than usual laying in my shadows on this study. And ultimately, it ended up fine, but it was a struggle and not as much of a deviation from my typical workflow as I was actually shooting for. I'm thankful that when the painting is sped up to like 500 or 600%, you can't probably tell how much my hand was shaking, but it's been a rough week for studies. Change is hard, and even when it's just a little subtle process tweak, it takes time, but with some patience and practice, I know I can get there eventually. I've received a few comments recently about failure and questions about how to deal with it, and given that I've made some pretty crappy paintings this week, I decided to make failure the topic for my time-lapse chat today. Failure is a topic that's worth discussing from multiple perspectives, and I'll probably talk about it a lot more in the future, but today I want to specifically take a practical approach on what to do after making a painting that had an unsatisfying result. And I'll share some stories about a few of my own failures and talk about how I try to handle them in a positive way. Most teachers try to frame mistakes as opportunities for learning, and failing at things is of course the precursor to succeeding at them, and it's all a very natural part of the artistic growth process. I mean, those are just words. They're really easy to say, but alone they often don't necessarily help you learn or boost your confidence. So just like there are processes for making paintings, I actually have my own process for failing at them. It's kind of like a post-mortem checklist to help me take stock of what went wrong and figure out how to do it differently next time. Actually, the very first thing that I do after having an unsuccessful painting attempt is I let myself be disappointed or even mad. Like whatever emotion bubbles up, I kind of allow it to happen for the rest of the day. And some folks might claim that their mistakes don't faze them at all, but if you're like me, and I think most artists, dealing with a failed painting can almost feel like going through the grieving process, and sometimes it's best not to deny your feelings and to just be with it for a little while and get those things out of your system, so you're able to assess your work later with more clarity. I find that immediately after making a bad painting attempt is the worst time to try to learn from it because it's a little too easy to cast blame on the wrong things. But once I'm back in the right headspace, I can take stock of what happened, and I'll frame my internal checklist as a series of questions that you can practice asking yourself. First, I ask myself, is there any point where I felt the painting going wrong? Because if you can pinpoint where things felt uncomfortable or started looking off, it could indicate a weak spot in your process or something that you just need to practice more. For example, when I started doing portrait studies from life a couple years ago, I noticed that there was one distinct place where I consistently felt like I had no idea what I was doing. I was pretty confident at the time in sighting and blocking in shadows, but The second I moved to midtones, I really didn't have a clear path to success, and it was especially obvious to me when I was doing these paintings in public. And all of a sudden, I felt self-conscious of people watching me when I got to that part. So once I recognized that was happening, I made it a point to go watch some demonstrations of how other artists handled that particular section, and then practice it at home before going to the next live session. The second question I ask myself is, did I prepare well enough? Now, I've talked at length before about how often paintings go wrong at the very beginning, because either I didn't have a clear concept, or I didn't make good thumbnails, or didn't get enough reference. If you want to hear me talk more about that, I covered a lot of that stuff in my video, Starting Over. And I kind of have too many examples of this particular failure mode from my past to count, but I'll call out a specific time when I was working on a gallery piece of Aragorn from Lord of the Rings a few years ago. Now, the worst thing about this example is that I was experienced enough by this point to know how much I should prepare, but for some reason I just got super cavalier about it and didn't. I only shot a couple of quick reference photos on my phone beforehand and just kind of assumed I could make the rest up. And all told, I think I started the drawing over 6 times. And not once did I stop and say, hey, maybe I should slow down and prepare better for this and kind of go back to the drawing board. And needless to say, that piece did not sell at the gallery. And in fact, I was so embarrassed by the final that I deleted the photos of the piece from my hard drive, and I never even advertised that I was part of the show. That was definitely not my finest moment. But yeah, good planning up front is so often the make or break factor in painting. And I've talked about that before, but one thing I haven't discussed as much is something that I consider to be like the master cause of that a lot of the time, of being unprepared. And that's what happens when you rush your work. It's probably one of the worst culprits that can lead to unpreparedness and a whole host of other problems. So another great question is, did I give myself enough time to work? I've struggled a lot with time management over the years, so I've run into this problem over and over again. And I remember back in 2010, I'd signed up for a small showcase table at IllexCon, which is a traditional art-focused convention in Pennsylvania. But because another artist dropped out of the show, I got offered an upgrade from the smaller art showcase to the main show at the last minute. I think the upgrade happened just 3 days before the show, before I was, packing my car and driving off. And I was woefully unprepared for it, because while the showcase welcomes a mix of traditional and digital art, which I had plenty of at the time, the main show is traditional only. So I went into a mad scramble for those 3 days to try to produce a couple of large oil paintings that would fill up the space. And I made just about every mistake in the book because they were incredibly rushed. I showed up to the convention with a carload of wet canvas, and I was hanging the paintings up on the show floor and just had a horrible sinking feeling that for the next 4 days, I was going to have to stand up in front of these wretched failures that I hated and act like I was proud of them. It really sucked. So when I got home from the convention, I spent, a little while feeling sorry for myself. Then after sleeping on it, I made it a point to focus on leaving myself enough time to work on things. And that meant, A, realizing that I shouldn't say yes to a show I'm unprepared for 3 days in advance, of course. But in practical terms, it got me serious about keeping a calendar. And I put a note on my easel that said, "Don't rush," as a reminder to take my time. And so even though it was a real drag, ultimately it was a learning experience. And I've been asking myself ever since then, do I have enough time to work on this? And a last question that I don't think I considered very much for a long time is, what was happening before I started painting? It's good to examine external circumstances and environmental factors that may have been outside your control, like what kind of pressure you were under while you were working, and how much sleep did you get the night before? What are some distractions that could cause you to be less focused? Like in 2009, I had taken a couple of illustration assignments for Dragon magazine, and around that time, my father-in-law passed away, and there was a lot of prolonged chaos in my home in the wake of that. And at the time, I really didn't realize how much it was affecting my work. I was actually spending more time painting than usual, but with worse results. And I was unnecessarily hard on myself because of it. I think I thought, I'm just in a rut. I don't know what's wrong. Clearly I have just lost my abilities. And that's not true at all. What it was is there was a major distraction, and I should have realized that, once that chaos is over, I can start thinking more clearly again and get back to normal. And after I've answered all those questions, I try to move as quickly as possible toward acceptance. Like, I try not to wait too long to get back to the easel, because the longer that I wait, the more opportunity that failure has to sink in and kind of feel like the norm, which is bad. You don't want that. So it's not just about learning from mistakes to make better paintings. Finding tangible things to fix and improve helps keep us from thinking, I'm a bad artist, or unnecessarily internalizing the blame. So the next time you make a screwed up painting, think about that process. Give yourself a day to feel feelings about it, sleep on it, and then ask yourself what was going on around you. Was there a point that you felt things going wrong? Were you prepared enough? And did you allow yourself the time you needed? Was the problem internal, external, environmental? Were you psyching yourself out? Or is there just a gap in your process that you can focus on? Because it can be any of those things. So remember that it's okay to fail, as long as you don't give up. And I encourage all of you to think about having the willingness to fail in the first place as its own beautiful act of courage. So thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to wrap this up for today and go take my own advice. I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee and take stock in the paintings that didn't go well this week so I can learn from them. And I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.